Angel Reese had just endorsed a strike. The vote had passed with 97% approval. It looked like a showdown was coming. And then Caitlin Clark, the league's newest face, quietly posted a 10-word caption to Instagram. No press rollout. No union coordination. Within hours, Reese, Aya Wilson, and Paige Buchers were back in motion. Resharing, reposting, revving the hype machine.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
The strike didn't collapse under pressure. It dissolved under relevance. As Clark's signature shoe lined up for a Super Bowl debut, the financial narrative locked into place. Corporate confidence drowned out union messaging. There would be no walkout. There couldn't be. In truth, this wasn't the story of a strike averted. It was the moment a generation of athlete entrepreneurs quietly closed a chapter on traditional labor protocol. The WNBPA's tools, votes, statements, negotiations, couldn't compete with real-time digital momentum. Clark didn't just shift the vibe. She revealed a structural truth. When visibility is value, absence is loss. Labor power didn't disappear. It transformed from collective silence to strategic presence, one repost at a time. The WNBA strike didn't implode. It didn't unravel. It just evaporated. And in its place, a 10-word Instagram post that rewrote everything. Both are welcome courtside this year. No press rollout. No union vote. No league intervention. Just Caitlin Clark, rookie, superstar, media magnet, posting what felt like a casual caption. But behind those 10 words was a seismic shift. Because that wasn't a post. It was a verdict. Not just about whether the season would go on, but about how power now moves in women's professional sports. The strike was supposed to be the big moment. After months of build-up, a 97% strike authorization vote gave the Women's National Basketball Players Association, the WNBPA, a massive bargaining chip. The message was clear. We're united, we're organized, and we're willing to sit out. And for a moment, the league felt like it might actually grind to a halt. Then Clark posted, and within hours, the math changed completely. Angel Reese liked it. Aya Wilson reshared it. Paige Buchers posted her own clips. Sabrina Ionescu started teasing new projects. Just like that, the tone of the entire WNBA ecosystem shifted from confrontation to competition, from labor dispute to preseason hype, from tension to traction. No one needed to spell it out. The alignment was unmistakable. Top players were signaling, loudly, that they weren't staying home. They were showing up. This wasn't about undermining the union. It was about pivoting toward the new economy of presence. In a media environment where absence is irrelevance, sitting out means fading out. And the league stars weren't about to fade. Not when the spotlight was finally firmly fixed on them. What made this pivot even more undeniable was what happened next. Nike dropped a bombshell. Clark's signature shoe, the one the sports world had been waiting for, wasn't just being released. It was being launched during the Super Bowl, the most expensive ad slot in American media, a platform reserved for the absolute biggest cultural bets. You don't buy that kind of airtime unless you're certain. Certain the player will be visible. Certain the season will happen. Certain the cultural momentum isn't going to stall. It wasn't just a marketing flex. It was a billion-dollar declaration of confidence. Clark's post might have cracked the strike's foundation, but Nike's Super Bowl move bulldozed it. The season wasn't just likely. It was guaranteed. And once that ad rolled out, the whole idea of a strike became symbolic theater, dramatic but ultimately hollow. The union's vote had been about leverage, but the leverage had already been redefined. It wasn't in boardrooms. It was in view counts. It was in reposts. It was in cultural heat. The WNBPA didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because the landscape changed and left it behind. Traditional labor frameworks are built on centralized action. Votes, statements, silence, withdrawal. But today's WNBA isn't structured around those ideas. Not when the players themselves have become decentralized media empires. Not when influence flows through social algorithms and viral moments. These athletes don't just wear jerseys. They wear brands. They don't just sign contracts. They curate narratives. Their value isn't locked into collective bargaining agreements. It's expressed through personal platforms, direct fan engagement, and the ability to shape culture in real time. And that's what the union misread. While the WNBA was preparing for labor escalation, the players had already moved on, not from solidarity, but from outdated strategies. They weren't abandoning each other. They were evolving, protecting their personal equity, steering their own media arcs, prioritizing visibility in an attention-based economy where participation is the currency. That Instagram post didn't break unity. It highlighted a new kind of unity, fluid, fast, digital. And in that moment, the union became not obsolete, but outpaced. Because when Clark posted and the stars followed, and Nike placed their billion-dollar bet, the center of gravity moved. Corporate confidence didn't rally around a labor agreement. It rallied around social influence. It rallied around the certainty that this generation of athletes wasn't going to sit out, they were going to scale up. Even the projected 700% increase in player compensation, something the union might have once claimed as a negotiation victory, no longer looked like a result of labor pressure. It looked like a market correction, an inevitable adjustment to the sheer economic value the league's stars now generate. That money wasn't won in standoff. It was unlocked through cultural capital, and it revealed something deeper. The WNBA's growth isn't being dictated by legacy structures. It's being driven by stars who understand their worth across platforms: social, broadcast, commercial. Players who see themselves not as employees, but as co-creators of something bigger. Not just a league, but a media ecosystem. Which is why the WNBA now faces a full-blown identity crisis. The world it was built to operate in, contracts, rosters, strike votes, no longer exists in the same way. The tools that used to matter don't hit the same when the real levers of power are follower counts, media rights, and monetized narratives. If the union wants to survive this shift, it has to become something entirely different. Not just a collective bargaining entity, but a hybrid. Part talent agency, part media strategist, part brand consultant. A body that doesn't just advocate for wages, but for ownership, creative control, residual rights, licensing governance, access to monetization data. Because the new labor isn't just physical. It's digital. It's intellectual. It's emotional. And it lives on platforms that unions were never designed to govern. Even the union's silence after Clark's post told the story. It wasn't tactical. It was recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that it couldn't compete with that kind of reach, that kind of momentum, that kind of speed. The message had already gone global before the union even had a chance to respond. That's what made the old playbook useless. When consensus forms on Instagram, no closed-door meeting can undo it. And the threat of Unrivaled as an alternative, completely exposed. That league never had its own gravity. It only existed in relation to the WNBA. No TV deals, no sponsors, no dedicated fan base. It couldn't offer what the WNBA could because it was never designed to lead. It was designed to pressure. And when the pressure failed, Unrivaled shrunk back into the background. What we're seeing now isn't just a sports labor issue. It's a preview of what's happening across the board in entertainment, in tech, in education. Wherever individuals hold the cultural capital, old institutions are scrambling to redefine their relevance. This isn't about killing unions. It's about transforming them. Because power is no longer uniform. It's plural, messy, personal. And unions, if they want to stay alive, have to support not just the collective, but the individual. Not just the worker, but the entrepreneur. Not just the protest, but the presence. That's what the WNBA missed. Not just that the strike was doomed, but that the rules of influence had already been rewritten. Caitlin Clark didn't set out to destroy the strike. She didn't have to. Her post simply reflected a new reality, a reality where voice, speed, and visibility now matter more than procedural authority. 10 words. That's all it took. So if you're still watching the ripples of this drama unfold, hit that like. If you've got thoughts on what labor power should look like in the influencer economy, drop them in the comments. And if you're here for the next cultural detonation, subscribe. Because this wasn't just a plot twist. It was a paradigm shift. And it won't be the last. The aftershocks from Caitlin Clark's post are still rumbling, and not just in the WNBA front offices. What we witnessed wasn't a one-off social media moment. It was a pivot point, a moment where the labor narrative cracked open and something new came pouring out. The strike didn't just disappear. It collapsed under a new gravitational center where the rules aren't written in contracts, but in captions, in sponsorship decks, and in algorithmic dominance. This wasn't a generational divide. It was a paradigmatic one. Because the second that Instagram post went live, both are welcome courtside this year. The conversation stopped being about negotiations. It became about inevitability. That post wasn't a suggestion. It was an anchor. It grounded the season in momentum so strong. No statement, no strike vote, no late-stage bargaining tactic could compete. Why? Because it came from the nucleus of market confidence. Not the league office, not the players' union, but the player who, whether the old guard liked it or not, was the league's visibility engine. Caitlin Clark wasn't just the face of the WNBA. She was the algorithm's favorite athlete. And the internet had already decided she wasn't going dark, and neither were the others. That's why Reese liked it. That's why Ionescu reposted. That's why Wilson leaned in. Not because they were turning against the union, but because they understood the new economics. Absence isn't leverage anymore. It's lost opportunity. And in a sport finally catching fire on a global scale, no one wants to be the face that blinked. This isn't cynicism. This is survival. The WNBA's visibility didn't just happen overnight. It was built, step by step, clip by clip, season by season, by players who understood they weren't just athletes. They were content creators, cultural markers, social brands. They weren't waiting for ESPN to notice them. They were building their own relevance, one viral moment at a time. And now, that self-made relevance has become the very thing the league depends on. So when a union threatened to pause it all, what was the cost? Who really stood to lose? The players, actually. The top ones. The ones whose endorsements, production deals, and platform partnerships all hinge on continued visibility. When they looked at the strike, they didn't see power. They saw risk. Risk to the very leverage they'd spent years building outside of traditional labor channels. That's what made Clark's post so definitive. It cut through the union's noise, not because she was anti-labor, but because she understood the value of continuity. 10 words said what the strike couldn't. We're not stepping back. We're stepping in. And the Nike Super Bowl rollout? That sealed it. That was a billion-dollar stamp of validation. It said, we're not worried about the union. We're betting on the players. It shifted the fulcrum of power away from institutional procedures and directly into market optics. If Nike was all in, then the financial world was all in. And if the financial world was all in, then the season wasn't just happening. It was untouchable. And the union? It went quiet. Not because it had no response, but because it didn't have a response. It didn't have the reach, the traction, or the platform-native fluency to insert itself back into the conversation. By the time they were figuring out how to react, the story had moved on. Players were back in training mode. Media coverage had flipped. Fans are talking about game day fits, not bargaining tables. The strike didn't fail. It got outrun. And in that, a deeper truth surfaced, one that applies far beyond basketball. This is the era of differentiated labor. One-size-fits-all organizing doesn't work when everyone is their own brand. You can't organize like it's 1986 when your members are managing content pipelines, not just practice schedules. Influence economies reward agility, not uniformity. Speed, not silence. That's what the WNBA must confront now. It's not that they were outmaneuvered by the league. They were outpaced by their own membership. The players they represent moved faster than the playbook allowed. And they didn't do it with malice. They did it with clarity. Because when the economic reality changes, the strategy has to change with it. The 97% vote, it was real. It was powerful. But it was also performative. Not in a bad way, but in a symbolic way. It was about posture, about showing unity to get leverage at the table. But it was never meant to be the endgame. And when the strike threat became real, the players didn't double down. They pivoted. Strategically, quietly, smartly, because this wasn't about choosing between labor rights and personal branding. It was about recognizing that the two are now intertwined in ways unions were never designed to handle. And that's the next evolution. Because if the union is going to stay relevant, it needs to expand its jurisdiction, not just over salaries and working conditions, but over the entire economic life cycle of a modern athlete. That includes brand deals, image rights, digital monetization, algorithm governance. Everything that touches player value in today's media matrix. The future isn't about dividing up a single revenue pie. It's about building layered income ecosystems. And the union's role has to shift from negotiating split points to securing equity, licensing protections, and long-term revenue participation. That's what the 700% pay increase points to. Not a labor win in the old sense, but a value capture moment. The money was already on the table. The only question was, who was going to grab it? And spoiler, Nike didn't wait for a committee vote. What's left in the wake of all this is a WNBA at a crossroads. They can't go back to the old model. Not when the league's stars have effectively become co-owners in the visibility economy. Not when every player is simultaneously negotiating with the league, the sponsors, the media, and the audience, often in the same day. The strike didn't collapse. It was absorbed. And the final nail in the coffin? The failure of Unrivaled to step up as a viable alternative. For all its hype, Unrivaled lacked the three things that matter most in a crowded media space: infrastructure, legitimacy, and heat. No TV deals. No deep sponsor network. No organic fan base. It didn't challenge the WNBA. It confirmed its dominance. The moment Clark and company leaned into the official season, Unrivaled lost its narrative anchor. And now, the WNBA sits stronger than ever, not because of administrative genius, but because its stars refuse to let the moment stall. This is the new normal. Labor power isn't just about what you withhold. It's about what you command. And right now, the league's biggest players command attention, dollars, and discourse at a velocity the union couldn't match. That's not a knock. It's a wake-up call. So if you've been watching all this thinking, what even is a strike anymore? You're not alone. This moment proves that in the era of influence, silence doesn't scare anyone. Visibility does. Leverage now wears sneakers, posts reels, and trends globally. This wasn't about one Instagram caption. It was about everything behind it. The playbook is out the window now. What just unfolded in the WNBA isn't an isolated incident. It's a masterclass in how fast influence can eclipse infrastructure. 10 words from Caitlin Clark. 10. That's all it took to defuse an organized labor movement that had been building for months. The WNBA had a near-unanimous strike authorization. Every talking head in sports was bracing for a season delay, and fans were already choosing sides. Then, boom, both are welcome courtside this year. That wasn't just a post. That was a system override. Because let's be real, once that went live and players started chiming in, the strike was done. Not because anyone came out and said it explicitly, but because every repost, every off-season training video, every teaser trailer for a player-led media project said it all. The top talent was showing up. And once the top tier shows up, the rest follows. This didn't collapse the union from the outside. It hollowed it out from the inside. It reframed the idea of power entirely. It said if the stars aren't stopping, then the strike isn't stopping anything. And let's talk about the speed of it all. We're not talking about weeks of negotiation or back-channel statements. We're talking hours. Within hours of that post, the energy flipped. The 97% strike vote, once a symbol of collective strength, was suddenly background noise. That's the power of velocity. And the union never stood a chance against it. Because this wasn't just about labor. It was about narrative. And narratives today don't get shaped in press releases. They get shaped in posts, in seconds, in clicks. The moment Clark posted, she didn't just express an opinion. She reset the stakes. The message wasn't, let's negotiate. The message was, we're not going anywhere. And that wasn't just a statement of presence. It was a strategic economic declaration. It was Clark, and by extension, the players who followed her lead, saying, we know our value. And we know how to protect it. That's why the players didn't stay silent in solidarity. They stayed loud for survival. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Labor withdrawal is no longer the most powerful tool for high-visibility talent. Not when the real money is in continued engagement, not confrontation. The market isn't moved by absences. It's moved by narratives, by content, by hype cycles. When you step out of that machine, even for a cause, you risk erasure. And the biggest names weren't willing to let that happen. Not when they've just started to take control of their own commercial and cultural capital. Nike understood that better than anyone. The Super Bowl rollout wasn't just product placement, it was prophecy. It forecasted a season that had to happen because the cultural investment was too big to fail. It was the ultimate show of force from the corporate world, saying, "We've already moved past the strike. Are you coming with us?" And players did, because in that moment, the WNBA became more than a league. It became a platform too valuable to pause. And the players, who had worked so hard to build that platform, weren't about to log off. Even a union, after everything, couldn't outmessage that kind of clarity. Their silence wasn't a strategy, it was a signal. They weren't equipped to fight a war on that terrain. Because while they were preparing to escalate negotiations, the season launched, digitally, emotionally, commercially, before the first tip-off. That's why this moment matters. It proves that labor power can't just be procedural anymore. It has to be platform native. It has to move fast, connect directly, and account for the reality that these players are no longer just talent. They're infrastructure. They're the product, the promotion, the public face, and the value creation all rolled into one. When that's the case, withholding labor is no longer the ultimate move. Withholding attention is. And no one was willing to do that. Not when the cultural momentum was peaking. The WNBA isn't irrelevant, but it's clearly behind. If it wants to lead again, it needs to become more than a traditional union. It needs to become an advocacy engine for the entire spectrum of player value. That means fighting not just for salaries, but for media ownership, licensing equity, brand governance, and long-term monetization strategies. It has to negotiate like it's 2026, not 2006. Because this was never just a battle over whether the season would start. This was a reckoning over who controls the future of professional sports. And now that the smoke has cleared, the answer is obvious. The players do, but not as a group. As individuals navigating a shared stage, each one a brand, each one a story, each one too powerful to be treated like a name on a roster. That's the world we're in now. So if you've been watching this unfold, trying to wrap your head around how a strike vanished in less than a day, there it is. It didn't vanish. It got outflanked by the speed of influence, by the economics of visibility, by a league full of women who understand that showing up isn't just about basketball, it's about legacy. So go ahead, like this video if you're riding the same wave of disbelief. Drop a comment if you think unions have to evolve or risk extinction. And subscribe if you want more stories where the real power shifts don't happen in silence. They happen in the scroll. Because this isn't the end of the story. It's the start of a whole new era.